The command came without warning. "You're out! Now!" The bark cracked like rifle fire across the open lawn. For a heartbeat, the hum of the Veterans' Day ceremony seemed to falter. The wind rustled the flags lazily, the music faded into memory, and eyes began to turn, slowly, cautiously, toward the commotion near the rear edge of the gathering. An older man had risen from the last row of folding chairs, slow and stiff, but with unmistakable purpose. His jacket was civilian but military in every stitch. Olive-drab canvas, weathered at the seams, its shoulders bearing faint ghost patches of past rank. A single silver pin gleamed beneath the lapel, and his cap, faded blue with golden thread, read, "Operation Desert Storm." His name, printed in cracked embroidery, had been nearly worn away by time. He hadn't tried to push past anyone, hadn't even stepped beyond the line of the grass. He had simply started walking, slow, measured steps toward the edge of the speaker's platform. His hands, liver-spotted and strong despite their age, carried nothing but a folded American flag, pressed tight against his chest, like something too sacred to share. That's when the guard moved. One hand to the man's chest, the other tightening hard around his forearm. The old man stumbled. His cap tumbled forward into the dirt, the insignia vanishing against the blades of grass. The flag slipped a fraction of an inch. He steadied it, but not himself. A hushed gasp rippled through the crowd, low and jagged. No one stepped forward. Not yet. A child's hand slipped into his mother's, eyes wide. A man in uniform glanced sideways but kept his posture locked forward. The veteran looked up, not with fury, not with fear, just calm confusion. He opened his mouth. "My name's on the wall. I was invited." "Not anymore," the security guard snapped. "This is for participants only." "Not walk-ons." The man didn't resist. He simply stood there, half held, half pushed, like a forgotten statue the world had moved around. There was a flicker in his eyes. Not pain, not anger, but something deeper, something settled. Then, beyond the folding chairs and the restless murmurs, a figure shifted. Near the fence line, under the muted shadow of a flagpole, a young officer stood very still, one hand lifted slowly to her radio. Her mouth did not move, but her eyes never left the old man. The antenna tilted, and somewhere, a signal reached farther than anyone expected. But someone in the Pentagon had already heard. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, please subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. The man's knees buckled slightly as the security guard released his grip, letting him stagger back toward the folding chairs at the very rear of the lawn. But he didn't fall. His hand found the back of the chair with the instinct of a man who had spent years steadying himself against far worse. He drew in one breath, then another, and stooped slowly to retrieve his cap. The dust clung to the brim as he brushed it off with a patience that did not beg forgiveness, only dignity. His name was Thomas Raines, aged 79. A former instructor in the United States Marine Corps, retired staff sergeant. Served in Vietnam, the First Gulf War, and the early years of the Iraq conflict, though by then he was more teacher than combatant, more fire-forged mentor than warfighting machine. His knees bore the scars of forced marches through the Central Highlands. His back ached from decades beneath flak jackets and pack straps. His chest still held the phantom sting of shrapnel that had lodged just short of his heart in the Mekong Delta, a reminder, every time he breathed, that breath was earned, not owed. But he did not speak of any of this. He never had. Tom Raines had arrived at the cemetery that morning just before sunrise. He always did. Not as a guest of honor, not on any official list, but as a man fulfilling a quiet obligation, one he'd never written down, never announced. He parked 2 blocks away to avoid the commotion, walking the rest of the way on worn-out soles with a simple folding chair strapped across his back and a triangularly folded American flag cradled in both arms. The same flag he brought every year. The same flag he once pulled from the chest of a burning Humvee in Fallujah. It had belonged to one of his students, a boy named Isaac Mercado, who never made it past 22. Isaac's name had been newly etched into the marble wall of honor, set for rededication that very day. Tom had come to be present, not to be seen. He had written no RSVP. He had no escort, no credentials, no parade sash slung over his shoulder. Only the creak in his knees and the solemn silence in his steps announced his presence. It was how he had always approached the ceremony, each year for the last 13, ever since Isaac's death. Each time, he stood alone, never interrupting the speakers, never taking a seat near the front. His ritual was simple: place the folded flag on his lap, close his eyes during the names, and leave before the applause. But today, someone else had noticed. The crowd had grown larger this year, the seating tighter. A civilian contractor, unfamiliar with faces, fluent only in protocol, had decided that credentials meant more than presence. And so Tom had been swept up in a misunderstanding that should have lasted seconds, but instead left bruises deeper than flesh. He sat now, 5 rows back from the back row, perched on the stone edge of a low flower bed. The late morning sun spilled across the green lawn in waves of heat, turning the polished gravestones into mirrors and setting the brass plaques aglow. A trumpet's hum wavered faintly from the speakers. The ceremony continued without him. But Tom sat very still. His hands were clasped over the folded flag in his lap, the cotton edges frayed from age. He looked down at the triangle, his thumbs brushing along one of its stitched white stars as though it were alive, as though speaking through his skin. His eyes, a deep-set gray, flicked toward the stage in the distance. The man at the podium was reading from a printed sheet, calling out names. His voice was practiced, ceremonial, lacking the ache that Tom's bones carried like marrow. From the crowd, a few faces turned his way again. A pair of teenagers whispered, nudging each other. One held up a phone but hesitated to take a picture. Their curiosity was natural, but it burned. A woman in her 40s, dressed sharply in navy and pearls, leaned toward a neighbor with a shake of the head and muttered just loud enough to travel. He should have registered like everyone else. Tom didn't flinch. He adjusted his cap with the same slow reverence he'd used since the moment he'd first saluted in uniform. Then he unfolded a worn sheet of paper from his jacket pocket, a program from the ceremony 3 years ago. 5 names were circled in pen. All of them had once been his students. Their loss was not a surprise, but it never became easier. Each man had carried a piece of Tom's training into their final breath. Each man had written to him at least once from a forward base, thanking him for things like tape on their boots, hands flat on the deck during shelling, how to bandage with torn sleeves. They never said much, but their words were like medals to him. He stared at the program a long time. Then something shifted. Just beyond the stone path, under the oak tree where shade pooled in soft blue shadows, a movement. A young officer, in quiet uniform blues, stepped out of the line of trees and raised a small radio to her mouth. Her eyes were locked on Tom. He didn't see her yet. His mind was elsewhere, 13 years ago, standing in a dust storm outside of Anbar. He remembered Isaac's last laugh, half swallowed by wind and sand. He remembered the boy's pack slipping off, the way he insisted on going back for it. He remembered the silence that followed the blast. Now, here in the present, the wind barely stirred. But Tom sat like a mountain, like a man unbending not from pride, but from the weight of memory. The stone ledge beneath him was warm, not hot, not cruel, just warm in the way that stone becomes after an hour of standing still in full sun. Beneath the weight of the flag in his lap, Thomas Raines sat with a stillness learned long ago in damp foxholes and burning hangars. The silence wasn't resignation. It was measured, chosen. There was no protest in him, no firebrand left. But there was a line he would not yield, and it was the shape of that folded flag pressed against his hands. A light breeze rustled the nearby maples. Their shadows danced lazily across his worn shoes, revealing the faded edge of a Marine Corps tattoo curling just above his left ankle. barely visible beneath the cuff of his khakis. Time had paled the ink, but not the memory. A group of ceremony volunteers walked briskly past. One of them, a young woman with a clipboard and tense shoulders, glanced in his direction. She didn't slow. She whispered something to the man beside her, and he chuckled under his breath. "I thought this was for real veterans," he said, with that casual confidence only found in the young who've never been tested. Tom didn't turn. His shoulders didn't flinch. He adjusted the angle of his flag just slightly. A habit, a ritual, something instinctive. The crease must always face outward. The field of stars must always be up. He had told hundreds of recruits that detail over the years. Some had remembered, others had not. Nearby, a couple rose from their chairs, brushing invisible dust from their suits, and stepped past him. The woman didn't look. The man, however, allowed his eyes to linger. They weren't cruel eyes, just curious. A look that said, "You don't belong here, do you?" Still, Tom said nothing. He removed the cap from his head and ran a hand slowly across his scalp. His hair, once steel gray and military neat, now curled slightly at the edges, soft and white. He placed the cap on his knee and opened the folded program again. 5 names, all marked with the same red pen, all written in the same tight hand. Lance Corporal Mercado, Private First Class Andrews, Sergeant Delaney, Corporal Yee, Lieutenant Avery. Each name had a story. Each story had an ending he'd tried not to carry, but still did. From the ceremony platform, a voice continued calling out names from a prepared list. Each was followed by a slow bell toll, the kind that echoed faintly in the chest, distant yet sharp. Tom looked up at the stage. He remembered when they rang bells for men he'd known personally, when his hands would tighten slightly with each name. Today, they rang for men younger than his grandsons. A small boy, maybe 8 or 9, broke away from his mother's grip and wandered toward Tom. The child stopped 3 feet away, staring wide-eyed at the triangle flag. "Is that for someone?" the boy asked. Tom turned to look at him. His face softened, lines folding gently like cloth. "Yes," he said simply. The boy nodded, then stepped back toward his mother, who pulled him close with a sharp whisper. She didn't scold Tom, just turned her back. Tom exhaled, not bitterly, just slowly, like a man watching the last light fall from a sky he'd seen 1,000 times before. From across the lawn, another friction sparked. 2 security staff approached, younger men in polished shoes and matching uniforms that bore the crisp lines of newness. One held a walkie-talkie, the other pointed toward the trees. "Wasn't that the guy who caused the disruption?" one of them muttered. "Yeah, still sitting out here like nothing happened. Should we tell someone?" Tom heard it. The words weren't loud, but they were loud enough. Still, he didn't move. His hands stayed curled around the flag. He'd once held a bleeding man's ribcage together with those hands. He had taught hundreds of young Marines how to tie field tourniquets, how to pack wounds with mud if they had to, how to talk low and clear into a radio under fire without breaking. Now those same hands just rested in his lap, guarding memories. One of the guards laughed under his breath. "Bet he wandered in from one of the old folks' homes. Probably thinks this is 1985. Another chuckle. Then footsteps receding. Tom closed his eyes for a long moment. He heard none of this when Isaac was dying. Only screams, sand, and the high metallic hiss of metal torn in half. And then silence. A woman's heels struck the pavement like a metronome out of sync with the hush of ceremony. She walked with purpose, chin high, clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield. Her name tag read L. Greer, Program Coordinator. Her lips were pursed before she spoke, already steeped in irritation. She didn't approach Tom with gentleness. She stopped just short of him, arms folded, standing at an angle that allowed her to speak down to him, despite his seated position. "You're causing confusion," she began without preamble, her voice flat but firm, practiced for public announcements and dismissals alike. Tom looked up slowly, eyes shaded by the brim of his hat. He didn't answer immediately, not out of defiance, just discipline. He waited, like always, for the whole message to be delivered before responding. "You're not listed," she continued. "We don't have your name under registered honorees, and this space is being monitored closely. The organizers are asking that all non-participants relocate to the public seating area or leave the grounds." Tom didn't move. He looked down at the flag still folded in his lap, then up at her. "I'm not here for a seat," he said, voice even, but rasped with age. "I was invited by Corporal Yee's sister. This was her brother's unit. I trained him. He never made it home." Ms. Greer shifted uncomfortably, glancing behind her toward the ceremony staff tent. Then, with the same tone of careful dismissal, she replied, "That may be, but this is a formal government-sponsored event. Everything is pre-cleared. We've had issues in the past with people," she hesitated, "claiming affiliations. I'm sure you understand." The implication landed with the weight of a stone. "You are not credible." Across the lawn, a young Marine in full-dress uniform turned his head. He had been standing at attention near the flag detail, but now his eyes tracked the conversation from across the distance. The young man, Lance Corporal Duran, took one step forward, then another, before being stopped by an older sergeant who placed a calm hand on his arm. "Wait," the sergeant said low. "Let it play out." Tom stood slowly, not defiantly, just enough to show that his spine, though stiff, still answered to something greater than humiliation. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and removed a folded envelope, worn soft from handling. He opened it and withdrew a faded RSVP card. It bore the ceremony's seal, dated 3 months earlier, addressed in delicate cursive. Ms. Greer didn't take it. "That's not an official credential," she said. "Anyone could have printed that." Tom blinked once, slowly. "I trained your director of security in Quantico," he said without heat. "He knew my name when I showed up." Greer's eyes narrowed. She gestured to the nearby security detail, 2 men in crisp navy polos and earpieces. One of them walked over, nodding toward Tom with a familiar smirk. "This the guy from earlier?" the guard asked. "Still hanging around?" Greer nodded. "Please escort him completely off the reserved premises. He's been advised twice." The guard didn't wait. He stepped forward, reached out, and plucked the plastic name badge from around Tom's neck. With an exaggerated flick, he dropped it into a nearby trash can without looking. Tom's hands remained at his sides. "Badge or no badge," he said quietly. "Those names on the wall, I carried them before they were etched in stone." But no one responded. Even the young Marine, Duran, froze again. His jaw clenched, fists tight, but he remained still. Orders held like iron. "Ms." Greer turned back toward the ceremony. "Let's move. Now." The guard gave a light push at Tom's back. Not violent, but not gentle either. Tom took a step forward, then another. He didn't turn to look back, not even when the name badge, now curled and slightly cracked, rested crooked in the trash. From behind the row of folding chairs, someone recorded it all on their phone, silently, without stepping in. Tom walked to the edge of the tree line, away from the crowd, and lowered himself back to the stone ledge beneath the oak. His breathing was shallow now, a tightness behind his eyes he hadn't felt since Kandahar. Still, he did not flinch. The sun had begun its descent behind the trees, the shadows of the cemetery stretching long across the clipped grass like quiet reminders of the men who now lay beneath it. The air was heavier here, cooler, in the shade, but not forgiving. Tom sat beneath a tall live oak, its branches gnarled like old hands gripping sky. He leaned slightly forward, elbows on his knees, the brim of his cap lowered just enough to obscure his eyes. His breath came slow and deliberate, measured like everything else he did. In his lap rested the triangle-folded flag, not pristine. The edges were worn, the stripes slightly faded, but it was still crisp, still ironed, still wrapped with a thin band of black satin. His hands remained over it gently, fingers splayed like a sentry's watch. From this distance, the ceremony stage looked like a distant mirage. Officers in ribbons, chairs in order, speeches spoken into polished microphones. Tom wasn't part of that ceremony. He was the reason for it. But he sat here, 100 feet outside the velvet rope, a folded flag, cradled like memory. The tree bark dug gently into his back, but he didn't shift. A mosquito landed on his wrist. He didn't flinch. He lifted the program he'd kept folded in his coat pocket. Not the one from this year, but from 2014, its cover creased and soft from age. Inside, 5 names had been circled in blue ink. All Marines, all young, all trained under his instruction. He read them again, slowly, silently. A name at the top had a faint asterisk beside it, CPL, EYI, killed by an improvised explosive device in Anbar Province, 2005. Tom had held him while the medics scrambled through smoke. He still remembered the final breath, the whisper that barely made it out of his throat. "Tell my sister I made it." Tom had never forgotten. It was Eunji Yi who had sent him the invitation this year. She worked as a civilian aide for Marine Public Affairs. The letter had come with her handwriting on the envelope. No formality, just a message that read, "You trained my brother to stand with pride. Come sit with us." He never expected the bureaucracy to treat him like a king, but he hadn't expected to be erased either. And still, the flag remained folded, his hat stayed on, his posture unbroken. His right hand moved to the inside breast of his jacket and removed a small item wrapped in tissue. Slowly, he unwrapped it. A bronze challenge coin. One side bore the emblem of the United States Marine Corps. The other read, "To the men who built Marines, we carry your voice." He turned it over once, then twice, then held it in his palm, thumb pressing the cool metal with memory. A gust of wind passed across the tree line, stirring the leaves in a whisper, like men speaking low. He looked up. On the field, one of the younger Marines shifted in place, eyes still fixed on him. The same Lance Corporal Duran, fists now visibly clenched. His superior barked a quiet command under breath. Duran blinked, looked away. The chain of command held. Tom raised the coin slowly to his lips and tapped it once, then slid it back into his coat. His body may have slowed, but everything else in him, the precision, the memory, the discipline, remained untouched. A nearby squirrel scurried through the mulch. Tom didn't move. The ceremony's audio system crackled in the distance. A colonel read aloud names of the fallen. Each name echoed like the beat of a muffled drum. Tom closed his eyes, not in fatigue, in reverence. His lips moved slightly just once, in time with one of the names, then silence. He looked down at the flag again and adjusted it gently on his lap. A leaf had drifted down from the oak. It had landed across one white stripe. With deliberate care, he brushed it off. That was when he noticed, from the corner of his eye, a dark vehicle rolling to a slow stop beyond the fence line. Government plates, windows tinted black. The passenger door opened. He didn't rise. Not yet. But he sat straighter. His spine, that column of years and miles and pain and duty, aligned again. Even here, beneath a tree, unwelcome by ceremony, but undiminished by time. Because even when the crowd doesn't clap, and the cameras don't turn, and the names aren't called, the flag never drops. And neither did Tom Raines. The black SUV had not parked in the designated lot. It rolled forward with the slow precision of something official, something that did not ask permission. It simply arrived. Its tires whispered over gravel. The windows remained opaque, swallowing the reflections of trees and flagpoles as it eased to a stop beneath the far row of pines beyond the cemetery's wrought iron fence. No doors opened immediately. Inside the ceremony, a speaker's voice wavered through the sound system, detailing unit citations and regimental honors. The crowd's polite stillness continued. Folding chairs creaked slightly under sun-drenched uniforms, yet several heads turned toward the fence line, toward the still silhouette of that unmarked vehicle. Then the driver's side door opened. A plainclothes escort stepped out, quick to round the back of the car and open the opposite door with a snap. From the vehicle stepped a figure in full-dress blue uniform. Her cover was in her hand, not on her head. 4 stars shimmered on each shoulder tab. Rows upon rows of campaign ribbons layered her chest like stories written in silence. Her posture was not rigid. It was rooted. She stood with the bearing of someone who'd faced mortar fire and congressional subcommittees with the same expression. Major General Diana Holt. Her boots didn't strike the ground with flair. They made contact with deliberation. She paused at the edge of the field, eyes narrowing not in confusion but calculation. She had not been scheduled to attend. She hadn't even planned to be on base that morning. But the message, that quiet, unceremonious signal over secured comms, had reached her an hour earlier. One word in the report was enough. Rains. She didn't need context. She didn't ask for details. She came. Her gaze moved slowly from the rows of pressed uniforms to the outer tree line, and then she saw him. There, beneath the canopy of the old oak, back straight, cap low, flag on his lap like scripture, sat the man who had once barked at her over a muddy radio in a jungle, who had covered her retreat in the middle of a failed perimeter breach, who had shown her how to lead before she ever knew how to command. Tom Raines hadn't changed. Not in the ways that mattered. The general's jaw tensed. Not in anger, but restraint. Her eyes lingered on his hands. The same hands that once stitched a tourniquet mid-airlift without flinching, now resting on a folded flag as if holding a memory in place. She saw the space he'd been pushed from. She saw the roped-off section he had been denied. And she saw the gold-lettered name tags worn by men who wouldn't have survived their first deployments if not for the quiet lectures given by that man beneath the oak. Her hand moved slowly to her pocket. She pulled out a single white envelope. No seal, no rank, just the scrawl of her own handwriting. She had meant to give it to him later, privately. Inside was a photo, a black and white image from 1987, Holt in training gear, covered in sweat and grit, standing beside Raines, his arm in a sling, her expression filled with fire, his with steel. He had once told her, in a moment of exhaustion, "Lead like the last man you lost is watching." She had never forgotten it. Now she watched him, not as a superior, not as a speaker or guest of honor, but as a student paying overdue respects to the first voice that ever barked her into bravery. Raines hadn't noticed her yet. Or maybe he had, but his head remained still, his body unmoving. She waited, not out of indecision, but because she knew this moment needed silence. A ceremony was still unfolding behind her. Applause began to trickle in from the stage. A name was being called. A silver bugle glinted in the sunlight, resting beside a folding chair, untouched. But at the edge of it all, just beyond the formal pageantry, the moment was already shifting. The balance of honor, and who carried it, had started to tilt, and Major General Diana Holt was no longer a bystander. She took one breath, then another, and stepped forward. No one noticed her at first. The crowd was used to movement, ushers adjusting chairs, a color guard repositioning, latecomers scanning for empty seats. But this movement was different. It carried the tension of thunder before the sky changes. That moment when birds go quiet and the air shifts just enough for the skin to feel it. Major General Diana Holt stepped onto the green. She didn't speak, didn't look left or right. Her cover remained tucked beneath her arm as she advanced, heel to toe, slow and deliberate. Her presence was not announced by words, but by the growing hush that followed in her wake. The civilian master of ceremonies, standing at the podium, faltered mid-sentence. The name he'd begun to read caught in his throat, trailing off into a half-murmured syllable that never landed. He glanced at the stage manager, then to the advancing general. No cue cards prepared them for this. The crowd parted in an unconscious ripple. Rows of attendees stiffened in their folding chairs. Some squinted behind sunglasses, unsure what was happening, but aware it mattered. The security personnel at the perimeter stood motionless, radios untouched. A Marine second lieutenant in formation shifted his weight, whispering something to the private beside him. But the general's focus never wavered. She crossed the field, not around it, not through the designated path, but straight across the ceremonial center, stepping carefully over microphone wires and the edges of banners laid down in tribute. Her boots pressed into the grass, leaving behind the faintest trail of bent blades. Soft and solemn, like a hymn walked into the earth. Tom Raines, still seated beneath the tree, heard the crowd before he saw her. He looked up slowly, not startled, steady. Like a man long past the age of surprise, their eyes met, and that moment, that sliver of stillness amid the ceremony, carried more truth than any speech that day could offer. She came to a stop 2 feet in front of him, not looming, not invading, but standing at attention. Her heels clicked together softly. Her chin lifted just slightly, as if positioning herself beneath the weight of memory. She raised her right hand, a full salute, crisp, direct, absolute. The kind of salute a general does not offer lightly, the kind given to commanders, fallen heroes, and legends still breathing. "Staff Sergeant Thomas Raines," she said, voice calm but clear enough to cut the silence. "My first deployment doesn't happen without you, and my survival sure didn't." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The flag on his lap shifted faintly as a breeze cut through the oak leaves above. Behind her, someone stood, then another. A low, chair-scraping sound, subtle but reverent, as the first row of Marines rose from their seats without command. No signal, no order, just instinct. One by one, Marines across the courtyard followed, standing not because they were told, but because they knew. Security didn't move. The ceremony's official stage had fallen into the background, forgotten beneath the shadow of something far older, far truer than scheduling or policy. Holt lowered her hand. She turned and walked slowly toward the stage. Her shoulders squared as if she were preparing to brief an entire corps, but her steps were heavier now, not burdened, but deliberate, carrying the moment like an unspoken standard. As she reached the edge of the platform, she stopped and faced the microphone. Her gaze swept across the seated dignitaries and officials who had, until moments ago, led the narrative. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask permission. She simply lifted her hand once more, not in salute, but in stillness, and the entire field, hundreds strong, fell into breathless silence. Then she spoke, but not to them, not to the podium, not to the cameras beginning to record. Her words were turned, softly, reverently, back toward the man beneath the tree. "Permission to speak freely, Sergeant Raines." He lifted his chin and nodded. General Holt descended the stage not as an officer, but as something older, a soldier stripped of ceremony, still wearing the truth of war across her spine. No applause followed her words. There were no cheers, just the soft, collective hush of a crowd realizing they had forgotten something sacred. At the edge of the field, under that broad-limbed oak, Thomas Raines hadn't moved. His hands still rested on the neatly folded flag in his lap. Its edges worn, the white stripes slightly yellowed with age, but its form untouched. It sat like a stone in his hands, held not with pride, but with reverence. He watched her come toward him again, her shadow meeting his in the sun-filtered grass. She didn't speak, not this time. Instead, she knelt beside the bench. For a moment, nothing happened. No salute, no handshake, no embrace. She simply removed her own cap, laid it gently beside his, and let the brims touch. The gesture older than rank, older than war. Behind her, the formation began to ripple. It started with one private, barely 20. He broke from the line in silence, stepping off the grass with care, like approaching an altar. His dress shoes clicked once on the pavement, then stopped. He stood before Tom and gave a short bow of the head, not dramatic, just deeply human, before reaching into his belt pouch and withdrawing something Tom never expected. His own chair tag, plastic with "Reserved VIP" printed across its gold edge. He knelt and placed it gently at Tom's feet, then rose, saluted, and returned to formation. A second Marine followed. This one, An older lance corporal with a sharp scar just below his ear stepped forward, removed his own lapel pin, a small silver eagle, and handed it to Tom without a word. Then another came, and another. A young woman with sergeant stripes placed a neatly folded program beside him, one she had carried inside her coat to protect from wind. Its page had a faint smear of pen ink. Beside a name under the In Memory section was a tiny, hand-drawn star. Tom's eyes tracked it with a quiet ache. No one asked permission. No one made a speech. The formation dissolved without chaos, becoming a slow, respectful procession. Each Marine in turn stepped out of their rank to give something small: a medal, a citation copy, a folded note, even a hand on the shoulder. One left behind a single bullet casing, polished smooth, engraved faintly with the date June 4, 2003. Another placed his own dog tag on the bench next to Tom's folded flag. Not one of them spoke. Not one needed to. Even the civilians at the fringe of the crowd began to shift. An elderly woman in a floral hat removed her pin, a gold star mother's brooch, and placed it beside the dog tag. A child, no older than 9, stepped forward with a paper crane in hand. He had folded it clumsily, but he waited until the moment felt right, then approached. His father watched silently from a distance, hat clutched to chest. Tom accepted the crane with both hands, nodding once. The paper trembled in the breeze, and still the silence held. In that heavy, golden quiet, time stretched like the light through the oak branches. Tom sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable, save for the slow blink of moisture at the corner of one eye. He raised a hand, not high, just a gentle lift, as if to stop them, but they kept coming, not to overwhelm, not to flood him with apology or performance, but to restore. Piece by piece, gesture by gesture, dignity returned. General Holt stood again beside the bench, her posture more at ease now. Her eyes moved across the field as if cataloging each offering, each silent witness, each unspoken vow to never forget again. She looked down to Tom. He had not spoken once. She did not ask him to. Instead, she turned, placed her cap back atop her silver hair, and gave one last slow nod. Then she walked away. No words, no command. Just a slow return to the edge of the field, where the Marines quietly reassembled behind her without being told. And behind them, the field remained scattered with the gifts of reverence: paper, pins, badges, brass, folded memories, all gathered at the feet of a man who asked for none of it, but earned every ounce. A soft wind moved through the cemetery grounds now, cooling the midday heat just enough to rustle the flags along the walkway. The voices had faded. Even the low murmur of the crowd had quieted into something sacred, a silence made not of absence, but reverence. Toward the edge of the ceremonial space, behind a line of quietly stunned organizers, a reporter with salt-flecked hair and a camera crew had been ushered in without fanfare. Not for spectacle, for record. A single microphone had been extended. No bright lights, no branding. Just a voice gently offering, "If the general has a moment to share." Major General Diana Holt stood beneath the shade of a maple tree, her back to the stage. Her face wasn't for the cameras. She didn't speak into the lens. She simply looked at the bench where Thomas Raines still sat, hands folded over his flag, eyes distant. "When I was 19, she began, voice steady but low. "I was nothing but elbows and boots. I didn't belong yet. Not really. I was assigned to Forward Operating Base Kingston for what was supposed to be a logistics rotation." She turned slightly, speaking more to the air than the recorder now. 5 days in, we were ambushed. Middle of the night. No backup. Comms down. Half the squad lost. A pause. Her lips drew tight. I froze. I remember that part vividly. I was behind a HESCO barrier, holding my rifle like it was a lifeline, but I couldn't move, couldn't think. The rounds were popping like firecrackers overhead, and I just stayed there. She blinked once. The leaves cast shadows across her uniform like shifting memories. Then this voice, clear, calm, old-school grit, came through the handheld radio on my hip. She glanced toward the bench again. It said, "Youngblood, the world is smaller than it feels. Crawl left, keep low, and if you're scared, stay mad instead." The crowd behind her didn't move. A stillness wrapped around her words. I did what he said. Got to cover. When I finally made it to the triage zone, he was already there, bleeding, left arm useless, still barking orders through a clenched jaw. She reached into the inner lining of her jacket, slowly pulling out a folded plastic-wrapped photograph, not brandished, simply shown. It was a snapshot, grainy, faded, but unmistakable. A much younger Thomas Raines, sling over one shoulder, uniform dusty and blood-smeared. His expression was tired, not broken. Just worn the way mountains are worn by wind, unmovable and old as hell. She handed the photo to the reporter without another word, then turned fully to face the resting place of the crowd's attention. Thomas Raines carried 3 men out of that firefight that night. One of them was me. Her voice faltered just for a moment, and he never even filled out a commendation form. The words hung there, bare. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. But in the background, the camera captured a quiet tableau. Tom still seated, head bowed now, fingers curled loosely over the lapel of his jacket where a rank patch once sat. He hadn't moved through her story, but when she finished, he looked up. Their eyes met across the space. He gave the faintest nod. It was not a nod of agreement or correction. It was the kind of nod one gives when memory is too deep for speech, and there's nothing left to explain. The stillness after the general's testimony was like the final note of a national anthem echoing off the sides of granite memorials, not fading, but living in the hush that followed. For a moment, even the wind respected it, halting just enough to let the weight of her words settle into the marrow of every onlooker. No one clapped. No one dared. The applause belonged to a different kind of stage. Here, only presence mattered. From the far side of the ceremony platform, the director of the event, a man whose tailored suit fit tighter around the neck than it had an hour ago, stepped forward without the smugness he'd worn earlier. His clipboard trembled slightly in his grip. He looked not to the crowd, but directly toward Thomas Raines. With a nod toward the sound technician, the microphone crackled once. We would like to make a small correction." His voice was dry, thin, unprepared for reverence, but it tried. "This year's Veterans Day ceremony was planned to honor those who've given their lives in service." He paused, glancing down briefly, as if the paper in his hand could give him courage. "But it was brought to our attention, rather publicly, that we have a man here today who did not simply serve. He built the foundation on which many of our bravest now stand." He looked up. "Staff Sergeant Thomas Raines, we were wrong to seat you apart, wrong to question your place." He stepped back. That was all, but it was enough. From behind the podium, 2 Marines stepped forward, their dress blues pressed to perfection, white gloves gleaming beneath the sharp November sun. They carried between them a folded flag, not one retrieved from a casket, but a freshly commissioned banner, embroidered with a single gold star stitched into its seam. They didn't march with ceremony. They walked with intention. Without a word, they knelt before Thomas Raines and extended the flag, arms outstretched, heads bowed, as if in communion. Thomas didn't reach for it. Not right away. Instead, he blinked slowly, eyes glossed not from pride, but from something deeper. Something carved by decades of being remembered only by those who never made it home. He accepted the flag with both hands, steady now, strong in its symbolism. From the stage, Major General Holt returned to the mic. Her voice this time was firmer, not emotional but official, commanding with the weight of institutional respect. "This year's dedication is hereby amended." A new metal plate was unveiled on the base of the memorial wall. The engraving was crisp, fresh, sunlight catching on the letters as they were read aloud. "Staff Sergeant Thomas Raines, He trained the brave who trained the brave. There were no fireworks, no music swell. Just the quiet scuff of shifting feet as every active duty Marine in attendance stood to attention, facing not the flag, but the man. Then, slowly, from the back, a single veteran removed his cap and pressed it over his heart. Another followed, then another. Within seconds, the entire field, civilians and service members alike, had risen, hats in hands, heads bowed, not for a fallen soldier, but for one who never asked to be seen. The next Veterans Day dawned quieter than most. The wind carried no urgency, only memory. The sun, slow to rise, seemed to cast its golden light more gently over the rows of white headstones and the polished black marble of the memorial wall. The cemetery grounds, once marked by exclusion, now bore something new, a low platform of redwood and bronze, with a single name engraved where before there had been only granite: Thomas Raines. He arrived not alone this year. A United States Marine Corps Jeep, a classic open-air relic that had long since been retired to museums, rolled down the path just after dawn. Its tires crunched softly against the gravel, slowing as it neared the front row. Seated in the back, Thomas looked smaller than he had the year before. His gait was slower, his shoulders hunched deeper from time and mileage. But the polished shoes, the sharply creased slacks, the glint of the eagle pin over his breast, all were as precise as they'd ever been. The young Marines who accompanied him stepped out first. Not assigned, not ordered. They had requested this duty. One reached back and gently offered his hand as Thomas disembarked, not because he needed help, but because offering it was part of the ritual now. As Thomas moved toward the front row, the crowd that had already gathered parted without command. No ropes, no seating charts. The space around his chair had been left untouched, a silent agreement between the attendees and the memory of last year's mistake. He sat quietly, no applause, no attention drawn. But then, from the far end of the procession, a single Marine broke formation, a young corporal with a tightly folded flag cradled in both arms. He walked, not toward the podium, not toward the memorial wall, but directly to Thomas, and without a word, placed the flag gently into the older man's lap. The tradition had begun. Each year now, the first flag of the day, folded before sunrise, carried with ceremony, would rest in Thomas Raines's hands, not as an honorific, not as a symbol, but as a torch passed from those still serving to the one who had lit the way. Behind him, standing just beyond the last row of chairs, was the security guard from the year before. He wore no badge now, not today. But his back was straight, his hands clasped in front, his eyes fixed on the ceremony with the rigid focus of a man who had seen something bigger than himself and hadn't forgotten it. He hadn't been assigned there. He had chosen to come. At the close of the event, when the rifle salute echoed across the grounds and taps began to play, a small boy in a scout uniform moved to the front. He turned toward Thomas, hesitant at first, then raised his hand to salute, shaky but earnest. Thomas, still holding the flag, slowly lifted his own weathered hand. He returned the salute, not in ceremony, not in spectacle, but as one soldier to another. And for that moment, that breath of unity between generations, the entire cemetery, for all its solemnity, felt like home. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you're watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.